been 5 years since Natural Questions came out. It's hard to overstate its impact in question answering. I would say that it's only second to Squad in terms of impact. Squad introduced the extractive QA format, but Squad was fake. It came from crowd workers without real information needs. Natural Questions had true complexity and verisimilitude. People asked crazy questions online. Some of the questions were unanswerable, and the answers were tied to Wikipedia pages. And it has yet to be eclipsed, and perhaps it never will. Part of the reason that I think Natural Questions will stand the test of time and never happen again is that Natural Questions has two very unique characteristics. One, questions from real users. Two, those answers are expensively verified by expert annotators. While it's possible that we might get something like this again, in part, folks from UW created a crawled set of Google questions. We paid quiz bowlers to find passages to annotate questions. Getting them together and in the same quantity of natural questions is probably never going to happen again. But I'd love to be proved wrong. I'll end the video with how I'd construct a QA dataset given infinite resources. However, natural questions aren't perfect. Siwon Min and company created AmbigQA that showed that some of the questions in Natural Questions were ambiguous. Here are some examples that Ben and I talked about in our 2020 paper, and I talked about at length in the QA Datasets lecture, link in the description. There are multiple interpretations to these questions, but Natural Questions only says that one of those interpretations is correct. How is the correct interpretation chosen in the original Natural Questions paper? The annotators saw search results from an information retrieval system, and if they found an answer in there, they called it the correct answer. So whatever biases the search results had, maybe a bias towards English-speaking judges, men's sports, or flagship universities, gets recapitulated in Natural Questions, and anything that goes against those biases is more likely to be counted as a wrong answer. Another development is the realization that not all questions are valid and shouldn't be answered. There are multiple aspects to this. Appropriately calibrating your QA system to abstain when it doesn't know the answer, for example. Natural Questions actually does a really good job of supporting this research by having unanswerable questions. But instead, I want to focus on linguistic phenomena that causes a question to become unanswerable. This line of research began with what has come to be known as the light bulb paper, from its title, "Which linguist invented the light bulb?" This question highlights the problem. There's a well-defined answer to the question, who invented the first commercially successful light bulb? But it sure as heck wasn't a linguist who did it. Something that a question answering system should perhaps communicate to a user. There are two takeaways here. First, that many QA systems tend to roll with questions like, when did Pablo Picasso paint the Mona Lisa? And answer 1503, hundreds of years before Pablo Picasso was born. Second, many of the unanswerable questions in Natural Questions are unanswerable because of these linguistic phenomena. And it's not just Natural Questions. You had all showed that this also shows up in Reddit. It's an important problem. But we don't actually know why a particular natural question is unanswerable. Is it because Wikipedia lacks the information? Because there's a false assumption? Because there's actually dispute about the canonical answer to a question? Or because it's a matter of taste or opinion? Because Natural Questions was focused on factual question answering, a reasonable position 5 years ago, we don't have a single comprehensive data set to address all of these issues. The numbers from the light bulb paper are just for a small subset of NQ, 100 questions. And perhaps we don't need that anymore. Perhaps with RLHF and DPO, we can just mix a bunch of data sets together. Perhaps we don't need a monolithic question answering training data set to rule them all. We just need robust evaluation protocols, which could be much smaller. But this is, again, a weakness of natural questions. It's not a great evaluation set. Lewis et al. Discovered that many QA datasets, including natural questions, have a huge overlap between the training set and the testing set. I'm a professor, so let's put this in a classroom context. This is like me giving out 2/3 of the answers and 1/3 of the questions as a study guide before the test is given out. Now, it's a great sanity check that systems can answer these questions if they couldn't get it right, like, what are they even there for? But that means that only 1/3 of the questions in the test set are part of a functional test set. And that doesn't measure generalization very well. Add to that the problems of ambiguity, false presuppositions, and all of that, and a smaller portion of the test set is actually usable, making it less certain that you can draw conclusions from the results that you get on the test set. This is something that the trivia community has known for a while. You can't reuse clues. For an important test set in Quiz Bowl, like national trivia tournaments, you need to make sure that you're finding new, interesting clues that haven't been used before, or at least not for a while. This is why we've always used the flagship national trivia tournaments as our test sets for Quiz Bowl. So that's all I have to say about the problems of natural questions, but I want to reiterate and make it clear that natural questions remains a great resource. It hasn't been matched. I still use it. I'm jealous of the people who got to build it. But it's important to know the limitations. Is there anything I got wrong? Anything that I missed? If so, let me know in the comments. Now, for all of the reasons I talked about before, there will probably be no follow-up to natural questions of the same scope and at the same level of detail. Nobody is crazy enough to do it again. But how would I do it if someone were foolish enough to give me the resources to create a natural questions plus or something like it? Back in the early 2000s, there was a QA service called Aardvark. The idea was that it would connect up real humans with topics, and those smart humans would answer questions about the topics that they knew about. Question comes in, and it gets routed to the appropriate person. This was a great idea, but before its time. What you could do today, and what I would do, is build up a large collection of these really smart experts, pay them enough to keep them engaged, and then a question comes in from a major search engine. We try to answer it directly with a Muppet model. If we can just send out that answer, but if we're not sure about the answer, we can send it to the experts. And we train the experts to interrogate the question answers to remove any ambiguity, false presuppositions, all of that stuff, to create a clean version of the question and a strong reference answer supported by trustworthy sources of information. And this could be used to train our next data set. This kind of interaction is fun. Yoga Shrout's podcast, Recreational Thinking, is a great example of this process. They interrogate a difficult question, tear it to pieces, and then try to answer that question and justify it. This is also played out in The Joy of Search from Dan Russell, where a really tricky question is answered in exquisite detail. But let's see how this might play out in an example. Let's say that the question comes in, what linguist invented the light bulb? How might the interaction play out?
Actually, most of the people credited with the development of the light bulb were chemists, physicists, or engineers.
Okay, smart. Who made the first light bulb then?
Well, do you mean created the first electric light? Humphrey Davy, the first filament inside a vacuum tube, Jasper Swan, the first metal filament in a vacuum tube, Warren de la Rue, or the first commercially successful light bulb with those properties, Thomas Edison?
I guess I meant who got the credit for it.
Then that would be Thomas Edison.
And to be clear, that's not what happens if you ask this to ChatGPT. It doesn't really probe the user's intent, but tries to do some correction. The light bulb wasn't invented by a linguist, and provide the answer to the most likely question or information need that the user was trying to get at. But it erases all the people whose work that Edison built on. But until we build such a system, and again, my DMs are open, Natural Questions remains one of the best resources that we have. This is just one video from a course that I'm teaching. If you want to get the whole context, check out the course webpage, linked below. There you can find all of the videos in the right order. YouTube likes to show you older videos out of order, homeworks, exercises, and recommended readings. And if you want to help other people find videos like this, please be sure to like and subscribe to provide a big gradient to the algorithm.